the operations teams are having to do more with less people and more with perhaps people that aren't super skilled in a particular product or a particular technology. And that's where another piece of like the AI comes in is, we give the ability, you can build a chatbot, and then it can interface with trouble ticketing systems, but it can give like an interface to a junior engineer that they can interact with.
Hi, and welcome back to the Teams Insider podcast. This week we are talking big telco infrastructure. That might be in operators, but it might also be in large enterprises. I'm talking to Matt Hurst at Ribbon around automation, containerisation, AI, and how all of that is impacting the choices of telecom providers and their infrastructure. Really interesting conversation, hopefully really useful to get a handle on containerisation and automation and AI in telco and how it's impacting that space. Hope you find the conversation interesting. Many thanks to Matt for joining the podcast, and also many thanks to Ribbon for all their support of Empowering Cloud. On with the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Teams Insider podcast. This week, we're getting into a bit more of an infrastructure conversation. I'm really looking forward to having it. We're going to talk automation, containerization in the kind of telco infrastructure space, but also in the large enterprise as well. Got Matt Hurst. Matt is a familiar face to the community, but for those that don't know you, Matt, maybe you could give an intro and your newer role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Great to be here. So Matt Hurst, I'm based out of the UK, and I'm Senior Director for our AI and automation practice now. So previously been working, as you know, a lot on the Teams and UC, UCaaS infrastructure. But yeah, my newer role is really around automation, and the implications of AI and how we help the telco and help our enterprise customers on that journey, really.
Awesome. It's a really exciting space. Obviously, a lot's been going on in AI and automation in general, right? Like a massive steps forward. Yeah. And it's really interesting to see how that is coming to telco and how much it's impacting and how fast and what people are doing. I mean, telco traditionally not been the fastest moving industry, if we're honest. Yeah. Like it's mission critical. It's really carefully considered. It's multi-year projects, but things are changing, and particularly influenced, I gather, by the kind of software containerization, Kubernetes type, cloud world.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, the telco world has traditionally been very static in the way it develops and evolves, but I think there's been a growing trend amongst telcos and large enterprises, as you say, as well, to embrace containerization in particular, for a number of things, the benefits we'll talk about, but also then automation. How can we remove some of the more mundane tasks that we undertake as an organization? How can we make things more efficient? And how can we also keep up to date in a much more rapid way? Particularly telcos, when you look at network component upgrades and things, it can be a very lengthy cycle. You're talking between 6 to 18 months to get an entire network software upgrade done, for example. How can we improve that? How can we improve our customer service and satisfaction levels? That's the key driver, really.
Yeah, and two things I'm seeing, like I talk to a lot of the telcos, particularly the operator connect telcos, and it's highly competitive, yeah. Right? There's lots of people in that space. There's lots of moving parts. People want to get into new countries. So some of that need for agility to compete, and it's not just OC, it's the other UCaaSs as well. Like the need to be compatible with those, the need to compete, and then security is the other one I'm seeing a lot. Obviously, security is a hot topic for everybody, right? But like these infrastructures are being attacked daily, hourly, all the time. So like needing to be patched and current, not being able to run on the stable firmware from 2024 Correct. Is just, it's not so plausible anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Security is top of mind for all these organizations. And the first point you hit on there is critical for telco operators. How can they remain relevant with their customers when their margins, their traditional voice minute margins, are getting eroded by some of the OTT players? And a lot of people sort of say, voice is dead. It's like, voice is not dead. It's what we do with voice and how we can evolve that further for the telcos, and how can they build new services, and including AI. AI is a tagline, but I think there are some real business use cases starting to emerge from this. And it's a case of how can telcos adopt that quickly versus the more traditional, very static manual process that would just never get off the ground. And that's where the automation comes in as a key component.
Awesome. So maybe we could kind of take it back to the fundamentals. Yeah. I mean, we say containerization, we say automation, we say AI. Can you kind of set the foundations of what even containerization is?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's break it down, because I think there's a lot of terminology we throw about and thinking everyone understands what they are. But let's take it back a step.
I'm on the edge of my understanding, Matt. So you're going to educate me today.
Yeah. So first of all, I guess automation, containerization, they're not exclusive to one another, and they're not dependent on one another, but they very much work in and enhance one another. If we break containerization down, first of all, so if you take a network component, traditionally it was a physical device. So in our world, the session border controller would be a physical device that operators would install in racks in their environment. That evolved to be virtualized. So that's the first step in virtualization, which is a VNF, a virtual network function. But it was still the same software stack, not running on a dedicated piece of hardware, but running on a COTS, Dell server, HP server, something like that. But it was still dedicated to that task. When we move to containerization, we have much more flexibility to be able to break that component part down into individual parts and much more rapidly spin them up in the virtual cloud environment. The best way to explain containerization, I think, is the analogy I use is, if you think about building a house, you build the house, you build the structure, there's multiple rooms inside the house, there's the plumbing, the electrics, the drainage, all of that's built for one purpose. And you live in that house. Compare that to a hotel. A hotel, the infrastructure's there, the plumbing's there, the electric's there, the drainage, the broadband's all there for the infrastructure. And then you go in and you rent a room. You rent a room and you stay in the room. So it's much faster for you to actually just get a room. You don't have to build the hotel. All the infrastructure is there. All the services and connectivity is there. Yeah. You just have a room in the hotel.
And I guess you can obviously have a room, you can have 6 rooms, you can have 20 rooms, you can have 50 rooms, you can have 50 rooms for one night and 10 rooms for 10 nights. Like, you've got the flexibility of scale there as well.
Completely, exactly that. And you can scale up the number of rooms you have, and you don't have to change the infrastructure, the underlying connectivity, it's all there. So it's much faster. And containerization is exactly that. We can take, like, the session border controller, and we can break it up into modules, sort of pods. One does maybe the signaling piece, one maybe does the transcoding piece, one does the management piece. You don't need to scale the entire thing to make it bigger and add more capacity. Maybe just transcoding you need more of. So you can add more of those pods very, very quickly in a container.
And you pick transcoding, that's a classic use case, right? I remember when I was going back now, specking like actual infrastructures, and like transcoding was a big one, right? Like, your peak concurrency is this, that people might be using this codec. We're going between these two PBXs, or PBX and Skype as it was. Like, we're going to have to buy the right physical infrastructure to deal with the peak scenario and rack it all and be ready. And that would sometimes happen and sometimes it wouldn't. But there was a lot of slack in that process because you were building for the peak concurrency transcoding use case.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And this is where now I can bring in some of the automation pieces. This is where the automation works with containerization to make that much more efficient. So you don't have to overbuild the container environment even for transcoding on SBC. You can build it to size, to your appropriate needs to begin with. But then the automation piece comes on top to track the utilization, to track your traffic patterns and understand how your network operation runs over a long period of time. And it understands that at certain times of the day, you have a peak of calls, you have heavy transcoding. The automation can automatically add transcoding pods in the container environment to meet that demand. And then when that demand fades away, the containers can be spun down. So you're much more efficient with your infrastructure and your resources that you're using.
That's so cool. And when we talk about this, I imagine a lot of people's immediately jump to public cloud, because that's like some of the driver for this has been like these massive infrastructures. And we talked about hotels and renting, but this can be your own private infrastructure, either as a telco or as a larger enterprise. You might already have some infrastructure you're going to co-use for these scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be public cloud. There are structures. And the great thing with the containerization is, you mentioned, Kubernetes earlier. So that's sort of an industry standard architecture that is in the public cloud, and it's also available in a private cloud environment as well. The containers are, you can mix and match and you can use them in any of those environments. So yes, absolutely. A lot of telcos and certain enterprises and certain verticals have the need to have it in a private environment, and you can absolutely do that as well. And you can
and the flexibility, I guess, like we might choose to go public now because it's faster, it's quicker, it's more cost efficient, whatever it may be, but we're not locking ourselves into that journey. Or actually in some countries we might go public cloud, and in some countries you might have our own infrastructure, but architecturally we're using the same kind of approach.
Yeah, absolutely, using the same approach, just using the same industry standard tools. So it fits very much into what we call the DevOps environment. So DevOps with pipelines and Git repositories and everything else, this is very much an industry standard term, not just in the telco world and not just for our infrastructure components, but for everything. So, the architecture that we're building for all of our containerized applications fits very much in that. So you can build up a DevOps pipeline to automate the deployment of multiple network components, routers, switches, and then the SBCs, management systems, routing platforms. All of those can be fully put in the same architecture. One of the other great benefits of this kind of containerizing the architecture, the DevOps pipeline, is single source of truth. So if you think about, as you said earlier, the way you used to traditionally deploy a network device or an SBC, even if it was a virtual device, you would configure that manually for that site, customize it, probably take a backup of that configuration, but that would just run in the network and service that customer. If that device was to die and to fail, you'd have to restore the backup, maybe make some tweaks to that to restore that function. With the containerization and all that automation, you have a single source of truth. So you make the configuration in like the Git environment, the actual source of truth for all your network components. The network components basically replicate themselves to that when they automatically spin up. If they die, the system automatically spawns a new container and it automatically takes that configuration single source of truth. So you haven't got to worry about configuring site by site. It's all done from a central repository.
Yeah, you might have heard the kind of, I think, infrastructure as code was a term bandied around, but like real truth in like, this is our configuration and it is mapped to the actual infrastructure, not I manually documented the infrastructure or I took a backup 6 months ago. Like it's like, this is the source of truth.
Yeah, exactly right. And then you can do, within the automation stack, you can do periodic checks of your real network components to make sure they're still matching that source of truth, or has something changed? And then you can highlight that, someone's manually made a change to a device, inspect that or automatically overwrite that maybe back to how it should be. So it gives a much easier way for operators, for enterprises to make sure their network is running exactly how they think it should be and it is configured.
And Ribbon are really leading this in the telco space. Obviously, there are some big competitors there, and a lot of people listening to our podcast will know Ribbon from the biggest tier one telcos, into enterprise. But this is a bigger industry approach that you're leveraging here. Like software has been doing this for longer, and containerization and Git and all this stuff. You're leveraging kind of years of experience in the more software infrastructure realm to take to network and hardware and not just voice but network as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It is full network. So as you know, Ribbon also do the sort of the packet optical and the IP routing stack as well. So it's taken it across the entire stack. But yeah, we started our virtualization journey, if you like, of our traditional pieces of tin hardware many years ago, 8, 9, 10 years ago. So we virtualized, the first piece was to virtualize so it can go on a VNF on a COTS server. That was done many years ago. And we spent the last sort of 7 or 8 years really perfecting the containerization and that optimization of resources. Because, as our discussion on transcoding earlier, we have so many requirements from customers where they need that ability to auto flex up and flex down in a public cloud or a private cloud environment. So, we've been doing that for a number of years. We've got customers who are sort of live with that. It's kind of the next step for us is to overlay that intelligence and that automation and the AI layer on top to take that journey further. And it is a journey for telcos. So there is a sort of industry standard body, the TM Forum, Telemanagement Forum, and they've actually defined sort of 7 layers of automation from a fully manual process network to a fully autonomous network. And all of our customers are somewhere along that journey. Some are further forward than others, but it's real. It really is happening now. We're working with some tier one operators in Europe who are fully committed to making their network completely autonomous. It's not about removing the humans and having the system run itself, but it's about improving the way that they can upgrade, automating the way they do testing, for example. So their operations team can be used for higher value tasks and creating new revenue rather than spending time on mundane, upgrades and testing.
Yeah, like manual patching.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned it at the start of the conversation, but telco's on that journey, the automation conversation and the containerization conversation, they're obviously related, and containerization lets you do cleverer things with automation, which lets the AI do cleverer things. But there's a bunch of automation you can do across the kind of classic quote unquote infrastructure as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a very good point. Like I say, containerization and the automation go hand in hand and they complement each other, but they're not exclusive. So yes, we have customers that have physical hardware devices, virtual devices from Ribbon, and they are using our Acumen automation platform on top to help with like test automation, upgrade automation. That can still be done. Obviously, the bit that can't be done is auto spinning up pods and things. That's where the containers are.
Yeah, the automation can't quite rack and stack yet.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a bit of a challenge. I think the AI has got a long way to go before it's able to do that.
So, let's zero in on telco, because that's really interesting. Obviously, that's my traditional space, and Ribbon's a strong point. Like, how do telcos start that journey, or to ask it a different way, what are the business pressures that are saying, oh, we're doing something new or different, like let's now look at containerization for this scenario or automation across our systems?
Yeah, so the engagements we're having with customers, and every customer is slightly different, but the conversation is always starts with, what's the business problem? What are we trying to achieve with you as a customer? What are your pain points, or what are your objectives for the next year, 3 years, 5 years? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to build more revenue? Are you trying to expand into new services? Are you trying to be more efficient and compete? Or do you have a visibility problem across your infrastructure that we can help fix? So very much the engagement approach for this automation journey is very much a consultative one. So we have a dedicated team who work alongside our sales and system engineers to work with customers to understand what those objectives are, and then build a proposal around, well, what automation, where do we start? We're not going to do a big bang and everything on day one, but let's start with some of the smaller objectives we want to achieve, prove that out, prove the ROI on that for the customer, obviously, because obviously the money piece matters.
Yeah, of course.
And then grow from there. And we're seeing our customers, once they can start to realize that first step in automation, they realize the power and what it brings for them, and then they start to ramp up and scale up from there. Telco, as you pointed out, telco is a different world because there are a lot of regulations country by country. There's a lot of local laws, lawful intercepts. There's a lot of liabilities on telcos that perhaps an enterprise doesn't have. So that's traditionally what makes them maybe a little bit slower to adopt some of this new technology.
And I've certainly seen myself, it seems like breaking into a new site or a new location, like there's increasing conversations about where infrastructure is, and particularly in Europe, and like the ability to be like, okay, we're going to spin up something new in France, Germany, Spain, and we want to have it in country on a public cloud is a much faster starting point than in country we're going to take some colo, or in country we're going to have our own DC. So that seems to be a jump off point for somebody to be like, okay, we've got our traditional infrastructure for this new site. We're not sure if we're going to do 1,000 customers or 10,000 customers yet. We want flexibility. We want agility. We want to get there in months, not years, or maybe even over a year, not 3 years, which is very realistic in telco. Have you seen that too? Is that kind of an interesting jump off point for companies to go from classic infrastructure to containerized?
Yeah, where you've got telcos that are breaking out to new regions, new territories. You're absolutely right. They're now not deploying a box into a data center. They're like, how can we quickly get that up and running, prove the market out? As you say, they're not quite sure. They've done their research, they've done their market analysis. they've had a couple of marquee customers maybe, but they don't know how big it's going to grow. So they will start with, the virtualization suits them perfectly, and the containerization, so they can just spin up in a public cloud, see how the business grows, see what scale it goes to, and then later on, if they want to then move that to a private instance, they can do that. So you're right, that's where we're seeing them start, because they don't have to do a massive forklift change in their infrastructure, because the more traditional hardware platforms, the virtualized platforms, the containerized platforms, they can all work together. It's the same function. It's just the underlying how it's built is different.
Awesome. And we've mostly talked about telco in the pod, but what kind of enterprise, what scale of enterprise is doing this, or what are the drivers for enterprise to do it?
It's larger enterprise. The main drivers are around sort of the operations piece, how they can be more efficient. And we talked about, SecOps, the security operations, how can they keep up to date with patching? If you look in the fintech, finance type of areas, there's a massive pressure and demand, obviously, to keep their security top notch. And they don't have the resources to be, checking vulnerabilities, working with vendors to understand, are there any third-party components that are vulnerable and need patching? So they are very much around the conversation on automating that piece. And
interesting. So it's not so much automating about flexibility of scale, because they're not maybe breaking into a new country, not knowing how many users they're going to have. It's about that security, visibility, operations.
Yeah, exactly. And also test automation as well. So if they want to take a new software load, or their automation, they're going to upgrade certain network components. How can they, be sure that it's not going to break anything? So they use our test automation tool, where it can create a sort of a digital twin of the network in a lab environment, do the software upgrade, run some automated tests that actually represent their call flows. So what we do is we actually do learning, traffic pattern learning across their network over an extended period of time. And we break it down to, right, here's your 500 most typical call flows, refers, internal, external, call hold, that type of thing. And we generate test scripts that you can run automatically against a new software load, make sure everything's running before you then roll it out to production. So a lot of large enterprise customers are really looking at that as well.
And that's really interesting. The thing I've seen in enterprise is that skill set of classic SBC management is getting thinner on the ground as well. So actually having an operationalized system that is multiple people understand, and that you've not got this, I've seen it where you've got two people who know how the SBC infrastructure works, and that's about it. It's kind of a bit of a black hole. Yeah. And I've just recorded a podcast on SOC 2 Type 2 and some of the certifications that particularly hit finance. And you need to have not just documented processes, but proven processes for your version management, your patch management, your maintaining infrastructure, your audit logs, all that stuff has to be spot on to get through that. And traditionally, I know, because I worked on SBC, traditionally that has been a challenging area, because it wasn't managed by the Wintel team patching the servers or the Linux team patching the servers. It was kind of on its own island.
Yeah, correct. And this is where, you mentioned the lack of skill set becomes a problem as well. The operations teams are having to do more with less people, and more with perhaps people that aren't super skilled in a particular product or a particular technology. And that's where another piece of like the AI comes in is, we give the ability, you can build a chatbot they can interact with, and that chatbot can ingest all of the, obviously the written product documentation, but also the domain knowledge for the customer. And then it can interface with trouble ticketing systems, but it can give like an interface to a junior engineer that they can interact with. I'm seeing this error code 504 come on this particular SBC. What does that mean? Where should I look next? They can interact with the chatbot that's got all that wealth of knowledge in the back end. So the junior engineer doesn't have to be an expert on a ribbon SBC. They don't have to be a VoIP expert. They can be guided through with that sort of AI assistant.
That's awesome. It's so cool to see this LLM technology being pulled to line of business use case. Like you're saying, the interesting thing there is, obviously you could put an LLM over public documentation. Yeah. That's one thing, but then pulling in the ticketing system and the history and being able to, kind of you can see where this is going. Like it's going to start to have understanding of your infrastructure as well. Right. So actually you can see a future point where it's like, I've seen the 500 and I recommend this, and
Yeah,
this.
exactly. And it's that full stack visibility really comes into play. So we look across the whole ISO stack. So, and as you know, it's like dominoes. So you stack it up. The application at the top might be seeing a problem with call quality, for example. But is that an underlying network problem? Is there congestion? Has a router failed? Anything that happens at the lower levels impacts everything above it. And by having sort of the AI and the analytics being able to look across the whole stack, they're then able to guide the technicians and the operations team to say, right, most probable cause for this particular error. They can look down the whole stack and saying, well, we've just seen this particular router has an outage or a high memory utilization. You need to go and look there.
It's so exciting to see that level of technology being made available to everyone, not just like obviously some teams have got amazing engineers that actually have the time and capacity to look over the infrastructure, look at the logs and understand them. But even with the best team in the world, you can't match the ability of these LLMs to be on it with the data, the insights, the documentation, the level of data they can consume 24/7. It's just a different gear.
It is. And the LLM is there 24 hours a day. It's there at 2 a.m. rather than you having to wake up that senior engineer and wait for him to have a coffee before he can function and help you with that question. So yeah, it is phenomenal. It really is. And I think as more and more of these real use cases with AI, it's going to cut through some of the hype of AI, and customers are actually really seeing the benefit and the power of how it can improve their customer service. It can proactively, head off a problem before it becomes a critical problem, for example.
Amazing. Matt, thanks for taking us through that. Really interesting to hear how the containerization, the automation, and the AI story all come together, and some of the jump off points for that. If people want to find out more or have a more depth conversation about their infrastructure and their requirements, what's the best thing to do?
Have a look on our Ribbon Communications homepage. Obviously, contact your local system engineers or sales team. They're more than happy to have a conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Matt.
Tom. Appreciate it.